In the middle of a quiet night on Earth, the sky was calm and space seemed empty as always. Most people were asleep, not knowing that far away in the cold dark of the universe something was calling for help. Deep inside an orbital station floating around Earth, a young technician named Daniel Reed sat alone in front of glowing monitors. He had done this job for years, listening to endless signals from the stars. Most were just noise, static, or echoes of old transmissions. But that night, something strange happened. At first, it was just a faint sound, a small flicker on the screen that almost went unnoticed. Daniel leaned closer, adjusting his headset. The signal was weak, repeating again and again, almost like someone crying softly in the dark. He thought it was interference, maybe a glitch from one of the satellites, but when he ran the decoding program, the pattern became clear. It was an SOS signal. He froze. The pulse sequence wasn't random. It was structured, intelligent. But there was one thing that didn't make sense. The code was not human. Daniel's hands trembled as he checked the coordinates. The signal was coming from far beyond the outer colonies, too far for any known human outpost. His training told him to log it and report it in the morning, but something in the sound made him stay. The voice in the transmission was full of fear. He played it again, filtering the static until words began to form. They weren't in any Earth language, but the tone was unmistakable. Someone was begging for help. He stayed awake the whole night, analyzing the data, trying to make sense of it. When the morning shift arrived, Daniel's supervisor found him pale and tired, staring at the screen. "It's not human," Daniel whispered, "but it's alive." Within hours, the data was sent to the Space Communication Command. Scientists, linguists, and military analysts crowded around, trying to interpret the message. They finally managed to decode a few basic words. The aliens were under attack. Their systems were failing. They had nowhere to run. The news spread quickly through secret channels. For the first time in human history, there was clear proof of another intelligent species reaching out directly. The world governments met in emergency sessions, unsure what to do. Some said it was a trap, that humans shouldn't get involved in a war that wasn't theirs. Others argued that if a civilization was being destroyed, humanity had a moral duty to respond. But before any decision could be made, more parts of the message were decrypted, revealing the attacker's name: the Vraks. The Vraks were unknown to human records, but their actions described in the transmission were terrifying. Cities wiped out in minutes, whole populations erased. The aliens who sent the SOS called themselves the Alaray. They said they had once been a peaceful people, living under twin suns, never imagining that such evil could exist. Their message was a desperate cry across light years of space, hoping someone, anyone, might hear before it was too late. Meanwhile, Daniel watched the discussions unfold on the news. He had never wanted fame, but now everyone was calling him the man who heard the first alien cry. Still, the glory meant nothing to him. He kept thinking about the voice, the way it trembled, the way it begged. He couldn't sleep, haunted by the thought that while humans debated, someone out there was dying. For days, scientists tried to track the signal's origin more precisely. They found it came from a system on the edge of a nebula, one filled with violent storms and unstable gravity fields. It was a place no human ship had ever entered. That made the message even more unbelievable. Whoever sent it must have been desperate enough to broadcast in every direction, even knowing it might never be received. Then something unexpected happened. A second transmission arrived. This one was shorter but clearer. The same voice repeated a phrase that the translators struggled to decode. When they finally did, it chilled everyone to the bone. It said, "They are here. The sky burns." After that silence, the signal stopped. Across the command centers of Earth, tension grew heavier. Military advisors began analyzing possibilities. Who could the Vraks be? Were they coming toward human space next? The possibility of a hostile alien force entering known territory sent waves of panic through governments. But among all the fear and confusion, a different kind of feeling began to rise: determination. People started to talk about the Alaray not as strangers, but as victims. The story spread online, with millions of people around the world following updates about the SOS from the stars. Artists drew pictures of the Alaray's twin suns. Children sent recorded messages into space saying they wanted to help. For the first time in human history, the whole planet felt connected not by war or politics, but by empathy. In a small cafe near the orbital base, Daniel sat by the window one evening, sipping cold coffee. Reporters had been chasing him for interviews, but he avoided them all. A news screen on the wall showed scientists discussing what to do next. Some believed the Alaray were already extinct. Others hoped a rescue mission might still make it in time. Daniel kept thinking about the last message. They are here. The sky burns. He knew what it meant. The invasion had reached its final stage. If anyone was still alive, they didn't have much time. He went back to work that night, unable to rest. He reopened the transmission files and noticed something he hadn't seen before. A small data fragment hidden at the end of the message. When he ran it through a translator, a faint holographic image appeared. It showed a planet half covered in smoke with strange buildings rising like crystals. And in the foreground stood a figure, humanoid but not human, holding up a symbol. 3 circles linked together, glowing faintly. The Alaray had sent their identity, their hope, and maybe their goodbye. Daniel stared at the image for a long time. He didn't know if the world would act, but he knew one thing. That cry for help had changed everything. Humanity could no longer pretend it was alone. Somewhere beyond the stars, someone had trusted them enough to call out, believing humans would care. That night, in countless homes across Earth, people looked up at the stars differently. Some prayed, some made wishes, and in the silence of space, that lonely SOS kept echoing. Through satellites, through hearts, through the endless dark. It was more than a message. It was a mirror showing what kind of beings humans could be. In the following days, the signal was officially confirmed as extraterrestrial by the United Earth Council. It became the most studied sound in history. Governments were still debating whether to send a reply, but soldiers were already volunteering for what they called the rescue mission. Engineers began drafting designs for long-range ships capable of surviving the journey. For the first time, science and courage worked hand in hand toward a single goal: to answer the cry. Daniel continued working at the orbital base, helping the research teams refine the signal's coordinates. He felt proud but also restless. He often stepped outside to look at the planet below, glowing blue and peaceful. He thought about how fragile it was, how easily it could be destroyed just like the Alaray's home. Maybe he thought this was why the message came to them, not by chance but by fate. Maybe humanity was meant to hear it. Weeks passed, but the memory of that voice never faded. The world was no longer silent. The stars no longer seemed cold. Humanity had been awoken by a call of pain, and in that awakening, something powerful was born. A sense of unity, courage, and destiny. Somewhere, light years away, the Alaray's message still floated among the stars, fading but not gone. It had reached the one species stubborn enough to fight impossible odds. The signal that began as a whisper had become a spark, igniting hearts across Earth. And though no one knew it yet, that single SOS would soon lead to a storm, the rise of the Deathworlders, and the day aliens would learn what it meant when humanity decided to answer a call for help. After the alien SOS was confirmed as real, the world was never the same again. Every major news channel was talking about it, and people across the planet waited to hear what the leaders of Earth would decide. In secret underground command rooms, military officers, scientists, and diplomats gathered to discuss the same question: should humanity respond? The message from the Alaray was clear: they were dying. But the attackers, the Vraks, were still unknown. No one knew what kind of creatures they were or what kind of weapons they had. Some feared that answering the call could bring those monsters toward Earth next. Still, there was something inside every person who had heard the recording, something that wouldn't let them ignore it. The voice in the SOS had sounded helpless and afraid. Humans knew that kind of fear. They had felt it through wars, disasters, and loss. And maybe that's why people began to speak up. They said it was wrong to just listen and do nothing. Slowly, the world started to agree. In the next few days, a special council was formed called the United Planetary Response Command. Its job was to study the signal and plan a possible mission. The best scientists analyzed the transmission data, while space navigators tried to plot the path to the Alaray system. The coordinates showed that it was far beyond the edge of human-explored space, weeks away even for the fastest ships. But humans had never turned away from danger just because it was far. They had built cities on frozen worlds and mined asteroids that could explode at any second. They were called Deathworlders by other species for a reason. In the outer colonies, where people lived on planets with deadly storms and toxic air, the news spread like wildfire. Veterans, miners, and explorers who had faced the harshest worlds began sending messages to the Council. They volunteered to go, to fight, to rescue whoever was calling for help. One miner from Mars even said, "If they cried out into the dark and we heard it, then it's our duty to answer." That's what being human means. Soon recruitment centers overflowed with volunteers. Engineers from the Luna base offered their ships. Soldiers from the orbital Marines demanded to be part of the mission. Even civilians who had never left their home planets wanted to help in some way. The response was more than anyone expected. Humanity wasn't preparing for war. They were preparing for a rescue. Inside a massive spaceport above Earth, construction began on what would become the largest rescue fleet ever assembled. Old warships were taken out of storage and upgraded with new engines. Medical ships were prepared, filled with doctors and medics ready to treat alien injuries they had never seen before. Supply freighters were loaded with food, tools, and shelters. It wasn't just a mission. It was a promise that humanity would not stand by and watch another species die. Among those chosen for the mission was Captain Elias Ward, a man with a face that showed both strength and sorrow. He had served in the Orion Wars decades ago, when humanity fought to defend its colonies from pirates and rogue machines. After the war, he had promised himself he would never lead another battle. But when he heard the Alare's cry, something inside him changed. He said yes without hesitation. People said he looked like a man who had been waiting his whole life for this moment. On the day of his appointment, Elias stood before the council. "You call us Deathworlders," he said, his voice calm and heavy. "You call us survivors. Maybe it's time we prove that survival isn't about destroying. It's about saving. If we don't answer this SOS, we don't deserve the name human." His words echoed through the chamber. By the end of the meeting, his fleet had been given a name, the Vanguard of Dawn. As the fleet's construction continued, the world's mood shifted. The fear that had first followed the SOS slowly turned into unity. For once, nations forgot their differences. Scientists from different countries worked side by side. Even rival corporations shared technology to build faster ships. It felt as if the whole species was moving with one heart. Meanwhile, in the quiet halls of the orbital station, Daniel Reed watched everything unfold. The man who first discovered the signal was now part of the command team, responsible for decoding any follow-up messages. But there were none. The silence from the Alare world was endless. Every day he stared at the stars, wondering if they were already too late. One night, Elias Ward visited Daniel. The captain wanted to understand the people they were risking everything to save. Daniel showed him the last fragment of the message, the holographic image of the alien figure holding the glowing symbol. "They believed someone would come," Daniel said softly. "Maybe they believed in us." Elias watched the image for a long moment and nodded. "Then we'll make sure their belief wasn't wasted," he replied. As weeks passed, the fleet finally took shape. Dozens of warships, cruisers, and exploration vessels stood ready in orbit, shining under the light of the sun. The crew called themselves the Deathworlders, a name they wore with pride. They knew what it meant, that humans came from a planet where life fought for every breath. It wasn't a curse. It was a gift. They were built to endure what others could not. Before departure, the Council held a broadcast for the entire world. The image of Captain Ward appeared on every screen, on Earth, on Mars, and the floating colonies of Jupiter's moons. "We go not as conquerors," he said, "but as protectors. Somewhere out there, a civilization cried for help. We will find them. And if the Vraks stand in our way, they'll learn what Deathworlders are made of." His speech became legendary overnight. Children memorized it and people painted it on walls and ships. Humanity had found its purpose again. The day of launch arrived. Billions watched as the fleet lifted off, engines glowing like stars. Families waved from viewing platforms, proud but afraid. Everyone knew this mission could mean death, but no one wanted to turn back. The moment the ships vanished into the void, Earth felt both smaller and stronger. Inside the command ship, the Resolute, Elias stood by the viewport, staring at the shrinking image of Earth. Around him, his crew moved efficiently. Pilots, engineers, scientists, all focused on the task ahead. Daniel was among them, monitoring the long-range sensors. The hum of the engines filled the air, steady and strong. It felt like the heartbeat of the entire species. As the fleet entered deep space, the crew began to train together. Simulations of alien environments were run daily. Combat drills, medical procedures, language decoding, all became part of their routine. They didn't know what they would face, but they prepared for everything. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. They were not just soldiers or scientists anymore. They were a family united by one purpose: to bring hope to those who had none. In the mess hall one night, as the fleet passed near a dying star, Elias addressed his crew. "We are the children of a world that tried to kill us every day," he said, his voice echoing softly. "We survived storms, quakes, and wars. We learned to fight not because we wanted to, but because we had to. The Alaray didn't have that kind of world. But maybe that's why they called for us. Maybe they needed the strength that only Deathworlders have." The crew listened in silence. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, a black ocean filled with light. Somewhere beyond, the Alaray were waiting, or maybe gone. No one knew, but they continued forward anyway. Because that's what humans did. They moved forward, even when hope seemed like a dying light. Meanwhile, far behind them, back on Earth, life continued, but different. People no longer looked at the stars with fear. Instead, they looked with pride. The rescue mission became a symbol of unity, proof that humanity could rise above selfishness. The words "Deathworlders Rise" appeared on banners, posters, and songs. It wasn't just about saving the Alaray anymore. It was about saving the best part of humanity, the part that refused to ignore suffering. As the fleet crossed the last beacon of human space, Daniel noticed something strange on the radar. A weak signal, almost like an echo of the original SOS, flickered for a moment and disappeared. It was too brief to decode, but it seemed to come from the same direction. "They're still alive," he whispered. Elias looked at him and nodded slowly. "Then we'll find them," he said, "no matter what waits for us." And with that, the Deathworlders entered the unknown, thousands of hearts burning with courage, chasing a voice across the endless dark. The gathering was complete, the promise made. The universe had cried out for help, and humanity had answered. What waited ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the Deathworlders were coming, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The fleet that humanity called the Vanguard of Dawn moved silently through the darkness of space. Days turned into weeks as they crossed the far edges of human-mapped stars. The distance between them and Earth grew so large that even radio messages took hours to arrive. Out there in the Black Sea between galaxies, there was no sound except the hum of engines and the low voices of the crew. Each ship carried hundreds of people, soldiers, engineers, doctors, and scientists, all driven by one purpose: to find the source of the SOS and save whoever was still alive. Captain Elias Ward stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Resolute, watching the endless night stretch out before him. Around him, holographic maps showed faint glimmers of starlight and data trails. They had passed the last known human outpost days ago, and now they were alone in a region no one had ever entered before. His crew worked silently, their faces tense but focused. Every day they ran scans looking for traces of energy or movement. Most of the time, they found nothing but dead stars and drifting dust. Daniel Reed spent long hours in the communications bay, replaying the old SOS again and again. He adjusted frequencies, amplified signals, and even tried sending out coded responses in the same pattern. He hoped maybe someone would hear them and reply, but all he heard was static. Sometimes he wondered if they were chasing ghosts, if the Alaray had already been destroyed and the mission was too late. But whenever he thought of giving up, he remembered that trembling voice saying, "They are here." The sky burns, he couldn't forget it. It pushed him to keep searching. Weeks later, a change came. One of the scouts at the edge of the fleet detected something faint, a trail of debris moving through space, glowing faintly under radiation. The readings were strange, not matching any human material. When the fleet approached, they found what looked like the remains of ships, alien ships, torn apart and floating in silence. Their hulls were scorched black, and strange markings glowed faintly under the ship lights. The Alaray's symbol, the 3 glowing circles, was visible on one of the broken panels. The crew went silent. They knew what it meant. They had finally reached the outer boundary of the Alaray system. But they were too late to save everyone. Elias ordered a salvage team to retrieve the fragments for study. When the pieces were brought aboard, the engineers found traces of energy weapons far beyond human technology. The destruction wasn't random, it was surgical, cold, and efficient. Whoever the Vraks were, they didn't just fight. They erased. Still, Elias refused to turn back. He ordered the fleet forward. They entered the system cautiously, hiding their energy signatures, ready for anything. As they crossed into orbit of the first planet, the view on the screens made everyone fall silent. Below them was a world covered in fire and smoke. The cities were gone, replaced by black scars stretching across continents. Rivers boiled and the sky was red like blood. Yet among the ruins, sensors picked up faint energy readings, possible survivors. Elias stood in silence, his jaw tight. "Prepare landing teams," he ordered finally. "We're going down." The first landing was risky. The air was unstable, full of radiation storms and ash clouds, but the Marines were trained for worse. They descended in armored dropships, their engines glowing against the smoke. Daniel went with them, carrying his signal equipment. When they touched down, the ground shook under their boots. The remains of alien structures stood like skeletons, twisted and broken. The silence was heavy, broken only by the crackling of distant fires. They began scanning for life signs. At first there was nothing. Then a faint pulse appeared on the scanner, weak but alive. The Marines followed it through the ruins until they reached what had once been an underground shelter. The entrance was half buried under rubble. They dug it open with their hands and tools. Inside they found them, the Alaray. There were only a handful left, thin and weak, their pale blue skin covered in ash. Their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, full of fear and exhaustion. When they saw the humans, they froze, unsure if this was rescue or another attack. Daniel slowly removed his helmet and raised his hands to show peace. He tried to speak, but the language was too different. So he did the only thing he could. He played the SOS message through his device. The moment the Alaray heard their own voice echoing back, they understood. Their eyes widened and one of them reached out with trembling hands. It was the same voice Daniel had heard months ago, the same tone that had carried across light years. They started to cry softly, whispering words the translator couldn't understand, but the emotion was clear. They were thanking him. Back aboard the Resolute, the survivors were given medical care and food. Doctors worked tirelessly, learning how to treat alien biology. It wasn't easy. Their organs worked differently, and their immune systems were failing due to exposure. But the humans didn't give up. Every ship's crew helped in some way, repairing, cleaning, comforting. The LRA slowly began to trust them. They told fragments of their story through translated symbols and images. They showed how the Vraks had come without warning, massive black ships that blotted out the sun. They had destroyed satellites, communication towers, and defense grids in hours. The Alaray tried to surrender, but the Vraks didn't listen. They attacked every city, every colony. The reason was unclear. Some believed the Vraks wanted resources, others thought they simply wanted to erase life that wasn't their own. The Alaray had sent hundreds of SOS messages, but only one reached through the stars, to Earth. As the humans listened, anger and sorrow filled the room. The Deathworlders had faced wars and suffering before, but this was different. This was extermination. Elias clenched his fists. "We can't bring back the dead," he said quietly. "But we can make sure the Vraks never do this again." Scouts sent to nearby planets confirmed the horror. The entire system was in ruins. Cities were gone, oceans poisoned, and orbital stations burned. But they also found something else. Vrak ships still patrolling the area, searching for any survivors. The fleet had stumbled right into enemy territory. Elias gathered his officers. The holographic map of the system glowed between them, showing red markers for enemy activity. They were outnumbered and far from home. But retreating meant abandoning the survivors. "We didn't come this far to run," Elias said. "If we leave, they die. If we fight, maybe they live," no one argued. They were Deathworlders. They had been born fighting impossible odds. They prepared for battle. Over the next few hours, the ships powered up, weapons charged, shields calibrated. The hum of engines grew louder, like the heartbeat of a sleeping beast waking up. The humans knew what was coming. The Vraks would soon detect their presence. Daniel watched from the observation deck as red warning lights flickered across the fleet. He thought of the voice that had called for help. He whispered softly, "We're here now. You're not alone." Then it happened. The sensors lit up, Vrak ships approaching fast. Dozens of dark shapes appeared on the edge of the radar, moving like shadows through space. They were massive, their hulls jagged and alive with strange energy. The battle alarms rang across the ships. The first shots came seconds later, blinding beams of energy tearing through space. The Deathworlders fired back. Space exploded into chaos. The Vraks had superior technology, but the humans had something more dangerous: the will to survive. They fought like wild creatures, unpredictable and fearless. Fighters weaved through enemy fire, destroying engines and blinding sensors. Capital ships exchanged heavy blasts, shaking with each impact. In the middle of the storm, the Resolute pushed forward, leading the charge. Elias gave orders calmly, his eyes fixed on the main screen. Keep formation. Hit them where it hurts. The ship shuddered as explosions tore across its hull, but the crew didn't stop. Daniel worked the communication systems, sending out coded pulses to confuse enemy scanners. Engineers rerouted power from sleeping quarters to weapons. Every hand on the ship worked as one. Hours passed like minutes. The space around the planet became a graveyard of wreckage and fire. The Vraks were ruthless, but they were unprepared for the madness of Deathworlders, humans who refused to die quietly. Finally, after what felt like forever, the remaining Vrak ships began to retreat. They had lost too many too fast. The humans didn't chase them. They were too exhausted, too damaged, but they had done it. They had turned the tide. As the surviving ships regrouped, silence filled the comms. Then slowly voices began to cheer. Across the fleet, laughter and tears mixed. They had fought in a foreign sky, for a people they had never met, and they had won. Elias stood on the bridge, looking out at the burning horizon of the Alaray world. "We found them," he said softly. "And now, we fight for them." It was the turning point of everything. The moment the Deathworlders proved that when humanity rose, not even the darkest enemy in the galaxy could stand against them. The battle against the Vraks had only just begun. The Deathworlders had won their first fight, but everyone knew it wasn't over. The Vraks were regrouping somewhere beyond the burning horizon, their dark fleets hidden behind the thick clouds of the dying system. The human ships floated above the Alaray world, scarred and damaged, but still standing. Inside the Resolute, the air smelled of metal, smoke, and sweat. Alarms still flickered. Medics rushed through corridors, and engineers worked non-stop to repair broken systems. Every survivor was exhausted, but none were ready to give up. Captain Elias Ward stood on the command deck, looking at the holographic map glowing before him. Red dots marked the Vraks' last known positions, scattered but not destroyed. He knew they would return, stronger and angrier. But this time the humans would be ready. Around him, his officers discussed strategies, but their faces showed the same mix of determination and fear. "They'll come again," Elias said quietly, "and when they do, we'll be the wall they break on." Down in the hangar bay, Daniel Reed was working beside the engineers, helping fix the communication array. He wasn't a soldier, but he refused to rest. He knew that without working systems, they would be blind when the Vraks returned. Every time he closed his eyes, he could still see the faces of the Alaray survivors. Their glowing eyes, the tears when they realized humans had come for them. That memory gave him strength. He told himself again and again, "We're here because we care. We can't fail now." In the medical bay, the Alaray were slowly recovering. Their bodies were fragile compared to humans, but their minds were strong. They watched the humans work day and night, risking everything for strangers. One of the Alaray, the same one who had sent the SOS, was named Syrah. She was weak but intelligent, and she had started learning simple human words. When she saw Elias visiting the med bay, she took his hand and whispered in broken English, "Sky. Burn. No more." Elias smiled faintly and nodded. "No more," he promised. That same night, the sensors detected something strange. Massive energy waves building on the edge of the system. The Vraks were returning, and this time it wasn't just a patrol. It was a full fleet, larger than anything the humans had ever faced. Hundreds of ships, their black hulls reflecting the dying light of the twin suns. The command deck fell silent when the image appeared. Every heartbeat in the room seemed to stop. Elias didn't hesitate. "Sound the alert. All ships prepare for battle positions." This is it. The order echoed through every deck, every corridor, every ship in the fleet. The calm before the storm was gone. The Deathworlders were going back into the fire. Engines roared to life, lights dimmed to combat mode, and soldiers strapped into their armor. In the lower decks, Marines checked their weapons, and pilots ran to their fighters. Daniel rushed to the communications room, trying to link all ships for coordinated defense. The fleet spread out around the planet, forming a protective ring above the Alaray world. The medical ships carrying the survivors were hidden behind the planet's shadow, guarded by heavy cruisers. Then the first wave hit. The Vrax came like a storm, fast, brutal, and merciless. Their energy weapons painted streaks of light across the void. Human ships were struck hard, shields flaring as explosions rocked the fleet. The sound of alarms filled every hallway. But the Deathworlders didn't retreat. They fought back with everything they had. Elias's voice rang through the comms. "Hold your line. For every ship they break, we'll take 2 of theirs." The humans fought like demons. Fighters darted between massive Vrax cruisers, striking at weak points. Missile trails lit up the darkness like fireworks. Even when ships took heavy damage, their crews kept firing. The Vrax were powerful, but they didn't understand desperation. They didn't understand what humans became when they refused to die. Down on the surface, the Alaray shelters shook from the force of the battle above. Sierra watched the sky glowing red through the cracks in the ceiling. Every explosion echoed like thunder. She could feel the fear returning, but she also felt something new. Hope. The Deathworlders were fighting for them. For the first time, she believed survival was possible. Hours passed and the battle turned worse. The humans were outnumbered 5-1. One by one, ships began to fall. The cruiser horizon was hit by a Vrax plasma beam and broke apart, scattering fire across space. The screams on the comms made every heart ache. Still, no one stopped. Elias watched silently as ship after ship took hits. His jaw was tight, his eyes cold. "Tell them to hold," he said. "We'll make them bleed for every inch." Daniel was working frantically, rerouting communication lines when a shockwave hit the Resolute. The ship spun violently, alarms blaring. Sparks rained down from the ceiling. He fell hard, hitting the floor, but got up instantly.
"Main array offline,"
someone shouted. "We've lost the forward guns," shouted another. Elias grabbed the railing and shouted back, "Divert all power to shields! Keep those medical ships protected." Then came the worst moment. A massive Vrax dreadnought appeared out of the storm, 3 times the size of the Resolute, its hull glowing like molten metal. Its weapons charged, aimed straight at the planet. If it fired, the Alaray survivors would be wiped out. Elias knew what had to be done. "Target that dreadnought," he ordered. "All ships, focus fire." The humans attacked together, pouring every missile, every laser, every ounce of power they had into that one enemy. The dreadnought's shields flared, holding for a long, terrible moment. Then, with a blinding explosion, it cracked open. But before it went down, it fired one final beam. The shot slammed into the Resolute, tearing through its hull. Half the bridge went dark. Crew members were thrown to the floor. Daniel saw Elias stagger, blood on his face, but still standing. "Status?" Elias shouted. "Engines failing," someone yelled. "Shields collapsing." The ship was dying. The alarm screamed and the metal groaned. Elias looked at the burning holographic map one last time. "We can't stop now," he said quietly. "If the flagship falls, the others will lose hope." He turned to Daniel. "You know the signal systems. Can you patch the fleet to me?" Daniel nodded, his hands shaking as he connected the lines. Elias took a deep breath, then spoke through the comms. His voice was rough but strong. "This is Captain Ward of the Resolute. I know you're tired. I know you're bleeding. But we are Deathworlders. We don't stop when it hurts. We stop when it's done. Those monsters want to erase life itself. We will not let them. Hold your line. Fight for them. Fight for Earth. Fight for the Alaray." His words spread through the fleet like fire. Even ships that were seconds away from collapse found strength again. Crews roared, engines flared, and the Deathworlders surged forward. The battle became chaos. Ships colliding, flames everywhere, but humanity refused to fall. The Vrax dreadnought exploded at last, its fragments burning across the sky like falling stars. The shock wave hit the planet, shaking the ground. The Alaray in their shelters ran outside, watching the light fade. Some dropped to their knees, crying. They knew what that light meant. The Deathworlders had saved them again, but the cost was heavy. Half the human fleet was gone. The Resolute floated silently, its engines dead, drifting above the ruined world. Inside, smoke filled the halls. Daniel crawled through the debris, calling out for the captain. He found Elias near the viewport, barely conscious, his hand resting on the cracked glass as he stared at the planet below. "They made it," Elias whispered, his voice weak but calm. Tell them. Tell them we kept the promise. Daniel nodded, his throat tight. Yes, sir. They're safe. Rescue teams from other ships arrived soon after, pulling survivors from the wreckage. Elias was badly wounded but alive. The Deathworlders had done the impossible. They had driven back the Vrax and protected the last of the Alarai. The price was terrible, but the victory was real. When the fires faded and silence returned, Daniel stood on the surface beside the Alarai survivors. The sky was dark, filled with glowing wrecks orbiting above like ghosts. But beneath the pain and destruction, something new had been born. A bond between two species forged in fire and sacrifice. Sierra looked at him and said softly, Deathworlders. Strong hearts. Daniel smiled faintly. No, he said. Just human hearts. The battle was over, but the story wasn't. The universe had seen what happened when humans answered a call for help. They were no longer just explorers or fighters, they were protectors. The Vrax had learned that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, when a cry for help reached Earth, humanity would rise, and when the Deathworlders rose, nothing in existence could stand against them. Weeks had passed since the battle ended. The wrecks of ships still floated silently above the Alarai world, a reminder of the price that had been paid. The stars that once felt so peaceful now looked like scars in the sky. The humans were busy repairing what was left of their fleet, and the Alarai were rebuilding their homes. But the silence after war was strange. It felt both peaceful and empty. Captain Elias Ward was recovering in the medical bay of the repair ship Odyssey. His body was weak, but his mind couldn't rest. Every night he saw flashes of the battle in his dreams, the explosion of the dreadnought, the screams of his crew, the faces of the fallen. Yet every morning he got up and asked for updates about the survivors. He needed to know that their sacrifice had meant something. Daniel Reed was now working with the Alarai engineers on the surface. The once beautiful city was now a field of broken towers and dust, but the Alarai didn't give up. They were rebuilding slowly, their thin hands carving strange glowing symbols on the walls of new shelters. They said those marks meant hope, light after darkness. Daniel watched them with quiet admiration. He didn't understand their language, but he understood their hearts. Sometimes he would walk out to the hill where the Alarai had built a memorial for the fallen Deathworlders. They had gathered pieces of human armor, ship metal, and burnt flags, and arranged them in a circle around a tall crystal that shone softly at night. The Alarai said it represented the light that humans brought to their dying world. It wasn't much, but for Daniel it meant everything. He would stand there for hours thinking about the people they lost, the pilots who never came back, the Marines who stayed behind, and the ships that were now silent graves drifting above. One evening, Sierra came to see him. She looked stronger now, her silver eyes calm but deep. She carried a small metal box in her hands. For you, she said softly, offering it to him. Daniel opened it and found a tiny crystal that glowed faintly blue. What is it? He asked. Sierra smiled. Memory. Light from home, you keep. Daniel held the crystal, feeling warmth through his fingers. Thank you, he whispered. For the first time since the battle, he felt something like peace. Up in orbit, the remaining ships of the Deathworlder fleet were gathering. A council had been formed to decide what would happen next. The Vrax were still out there, their empire spread across hundreds of systems. The humans knew this wasn't the end, just the beginning of something much bigger. The SOS from the Alarai had shown the galaxy what the Deathworlders could do, and that message had spread far. Other species, once too afraid to speak, had started sending their own calls for help. On the day of the final meeting, Elias stood before a small group of officers and Alarai leaders. His uniform was damaged, his arms still in a sling, but his eyes were clear. We came here to answer one distress call, he said quietly. We thought we were saving a single world, but what we found is something greater. There are others out there who need us. We can't go back and pretend we didn't hear them. An Alarai elder bowed her head and said, Your people saved ours. If you go to save others, we will go with you. Her voice trembled with emotion. Elias smiled faintly. Then maybe we're not alone anymore. Daniel was standing near the back listening. He felt proud but also afraid. He knew how hard the last fight had been, how many they had lost. But he also knew Elias was right. The Vrax would never stop unless someone made them stop. And if not humans, then who? After the meeting, Daniel and Elias stood together in silence, watching the stars through the viewport. You think we can really do it? Daniel asked quietly. Elias smiled. Do what? Stop them. Save others. Keep doing this. Elias's gaze was distant. We'll try. That's what we do best. We try, even when it looks impossible. Later that night, the humans and Alaray held a ceremony on the surface. The sky above was still full of debris, but it shone like 1,000 candles. The survivors from both sides gathered around the crystal memorial. Elias stood before them, his voice carrying across the silence. The ones we lost today are not gone, he said. They live in what we've built, in every life we saved, in every breath this world takes. Then one by one the soldiers lit small flares and placed them at the base of the crystal. The Alaray added glowing stones that pulsed softly, their light mixing with the human fire. It was beautiful, a symbol of two worlds united by sacrifice. Daniel looked at Sira, who stood beside him. She whispered, "We are family now." Daniel nodded. Yes, family. After the ceremony, Elias sent one last message to Earth. It was short, just a few words. Mission successful. Survivors safe. Humanity has allies now. When he finished recording, he stared at the console for a long moment. Then he added one final line. We heard one cry for help. There will be more, and we will answer. Months later, when the fleet was repaired and ready, the humans prepared to leave the Alaray world. The Alaray stood at the edge of their rebuilt city, watching as the great ships rose into the sky. Some wept, others waved. Sira was among them. She pressed her hand to her chest and whispered a prayer in her language. The humans had brought them back from extinction, and their promise would never be forgotten. On board the Odyssey, Daniel stood beside Elias as the stars stretched into lines through the viewport. Where to next? Daniel asked. Elias looked at the navigation screen where dozens of signals blinked faintly. Distress calls from across the galaxy. Anywhere they need us, he said. The engines flared and the fleet jumped into the unknown. As they traveled through the vast silence of space, Daniel thought about how it all started. With one small SOS from a dying world. A message that crossed the stars and woke something deep within humanity. The Vraks had seen humans as nothing more than another primitive race, but they were wrong. They had awakened the Deathworlders, and now the universe would never be the same. Word of what had happened on the Alaray world spread quickly. In distant systems, enslaved races whispered stories about the humans, the warriors from the death world who came when hope was gone. They spoke of ships that burned brighter than suns, of soldiers who fought without fear, and of voices that promised safety. To them, humans became legends, not because they were perfect, but because they refused to surrender. Even on Earth, the story changed everything. When Elias's final report reached home, people listened in silence. For the first time, humanity truly understood what it meant to be part of something bigger than themselves. The galaxy wasn't just full of danger. It was full of lives waiting for someone to care. Volunteers lined up to join the Deathworlder fleets. Engineers began designing stronger ships. And entire nations came together under one purpose, to protect life beyond their own world. Back among the stars, Elias often found himself thinking of that first battle. He remembered the faces, the voices, the fear, and the courage. He had lost friends, but he had gained something far more powerful, faith in what humanity could become. One night, as the fleet drifted between systems, Daniel visited the observation deck. He looked out at the endless stars, each one a possible world, a possible cry for help. In his hand he held the small crystal Sira had given him. It still glowed softly, pulsing like a heartbeat. He smiled and whispered, "We're still out here, Sira. We're still listening." The ship engines rumbled softly, a sound that now felt like home. He turned and saw Elias walking toward him. "Can't sleep again?" the captain asked with a faint smile. Daniel shrugged. "Just thinking. You ever wonder if we'll see them again, the Alaray?" Elias looked out at the stars. "I think we will, one day. And when we do, I hope they see what we've become." They stood together in silence, two men among billions, looking at the stars not with fear, but with purpose. Somewhere out there, others were waiting, lost, desperate, and afraid. But now they had hope. Because the Deathworlders were out there. Because the humans who had once lived on a single small planet were now guardians of the galaxy. And whenever a faint SOS signal whispered through the void, traveling across the cold emptiness of space, it found them, It reached the fleet that never turned away. And every time, without fail, humanity answered. They didn't fight for glory or revenge anymore. They fought because they remembered that one world, that one cry, and the promise they made to never let the light die. The Deathworlders had awakened, and the universe would forever remember the day when humanity decided that no cry for help would ever go unanswered again.